Become the worst neighbor and-HOA board member ever? Lose your job and-HOA. Let me start by saying never purchase a house in a HOA. It is a complete mess that should be regulated and illegal. If I knew about HOAs when I bought my first home, I would have never purchased my first home in one. Me and my wife purchased our first home when we were 24 and 25. We spent months looking at houses in areas and tried to find a forever home in a good district for potential future kids, etc. We finally found a perfect one at a decent price. At first everything was great, super nice neighborhood and decent neighbors. Well, a few months after buying the house, we rented an RV to go on a trip and parked it in the driveway for the 3 days leading up to the trip to pack it and for me to learn how half the things in it worked. Well, this is when we learned that HOAs are absolutely crazy, and our neighbor was on the board of our local HOA. Within an hour of it being parked, he got home and stormed over demanding we remove it from his neighborhood or he would have it towed and fine us for every hour it was there. Myself, being the average and normal person, told him kindly to fuck off and get out of my driveway, and told him if he returns I'll call the cops because he was screaming like a madman inches from my face. About 3 hours later, a big rig tow truck shows up and he walked up like he was a god and handed me a plain envelope with a letter inside that pretty much said, by order of the HOA this RV is to be towed and a fine of $1,500 for violating their rules. While Mr. Crazy board member might not listen to reason, the tow truck guy they found wasn't so fond of entering my driveway and towing a vehicle when I told him if he comes on the property I'll call the cops. Once the tow truck driver decided he's done being involved in this mess and left, neighbor goes even more crazy and storms off. I call my friend to get his dad's number because he's an attorney, to ask him about this insane letter and fine I just received and to ask him some legal advice. After speaking to his father, he told me to come down, write him a $500 check and bring along all the papers I received when purchasing the home and the current letter I just received. The next day he had a very friendly letter sent to my neighbor and the HOA board, basically telling my neighbor to fuck himself in legal terms and to leave us and our property alone. I then continued to receive fines of $1,500 a day in plain envelopes not postmarked stuffed into my mailbox that I then turned over to my friend's father, and each time he sent another set of letters and contacted USPS to report the incidents. Turns out putting mail into people's mailbox is a crime. Who knew? Well, we decide to go on our week-long trip across the state and mildly forget about it all. Kind of upset I had to spend $500 to have an attorney send letters, but that's what they do. Fast forward to us returning from the trip and the RV back in our driveway for 2 days so we can unload/clean then return it. Again, each day more envelopes stuffed into our mailbox and more visits to our attorney and more letters sent and more incidents reported to USPS. Well, here's where the fun really begins. Turns out Mr. Crazy finally gives me a summons to appear before the board. My attorney said this is crazy illegal because what they've done is use what looks like an actual legal document improperly to summon me to the board. Another $500 to the attorney, and we wait for the date they made, a Tuesday at 10 a.m. They attempt to keep my attorney out of the room on some board privacy rule, but quickly shut the hell up when he begins going over their own rules that they are violating to them. Deep in this HOA book are some very nicely worded rules and stuff outlining about what makes board members ineligible, and how they cannot serve if they commit certain infractions. Well, guess what Mr. Crazy neighbor has done? Committed several of them, all documented. Also, the cherry on top is that if 51% of the HOA members vote to dissolve the HOA, it all goes away. Well, it happens my wife worked part-time from home during this mess and had all the free time in the world to begin to disband the HOA campaign. Over the course of the next 2 months she went around and really began to get to know our neighborhood really well. Turns out a lot of people dislike the HOA and the power-hungry seniors who act like dictators that run it. The HOA attempted to stall everything by holding no meetings, another HOA violation, and began their own campaign trying to change HOA rules to keep from being ousted, and a fairly racist flyer and letter to everyone explaining the dangers of not having an HOA and all the bad people, blacks and Mexicans, that will move in and take over/sell drugs, etc., that our houses would become much less valuable and everything else they could try. Turns out it's extremely fun to use someone's own rules against them. The neighborhood even started a fund that paid us back what it cost us to get the attorney started and the continued costs he had. A few weeks after their failed fear campaign and being forced to hold a meeting, a vote was called by using their own rules. The HOA was no more and all remaining funds were to be dispersed back to the homeowners and members equally. This never happened. Turns out somehow the HOA used all their funds in the course of the last 2 months. About half the former board members sold their homes and moved, including Mr. Crazy neighbor. I've spent 3 hours trying to find old news articles because it was reported on mostly due to the racist letters by the HOA, but it was too long ago to find anything. Moral of the whole mess: don't buy a home in an HOA, and if you do, plan to hire an attorney.